Welcome back, everybody. This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Kevin Cork in Washington. We've been watching the GCC, the Gulf Council Summit, happening over in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The president speaking there not long ago. Very interesting comments. He talked a great deal about this idea of not just growing our relationships in the region, but also helping the region itself find a more peaceful and a more prosperous future. He says he doesn't want to have enemies forever. He wants to turn some of those enemies into strategic partners, if at all possible. A very interesting conversation, which we've also been having here throughout the night. I want to welcome E.J. Kimball back into our conversation. We were speaking before the break about this notion, E.J., of the president saying, hey, listen, we can work with Syria. We can help. By the way, we heard tonight that they've lifted sanctions on Syria. Heard that earlier. The president saying this morning that he really feels very strongly that they have a possibility to have a path, a future that will be a lot more prosperous. If you think about their population, a great number of them below the poverty line. This has been challenging. You heard Eugene point out, EJ, the fact that the Syrians have a number of regional actors also to deal with, even within their own country. And yet there is a positivity. We heard as well tonight that that country is open to U.S. purchases of gas and oil. It may not be a lot, but they're certainly keen on this idea of a partnership. Your thoughts?
Well, I understand Eugene's points, and they're quite valid. And it's actually an interesting dynamic here, because what the president's doing, it's from an economic intervention as opposed to a nation building exercise. And I think it's a very important distinction here, because the president's been very clear about being against this idea of nation building like we tried in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so what he's looking at is trying to influence the opportunity for Syria to rebuild the nation. Obviously, if they're able to control the country as they're coming out of this civil war. But to have U.S. involvement there is going to be much better than the U.S. to be on the sidelines hoping to gather information from the outside. Always being on the inside, being able to influence is going to be better, especially when you have a country like Turkey that has been intimately involved. It also helps to know that the U.S.-Israel relationship is so strong because Israel is operating in southern Syria and has been very clear since they went into Syria onto the Syrian side of the Golan Heights, and even helping to protect the Druze community in southern Syria from these attacks. So, I think there's a lot of potential positives here, and the president's MO is through economic interventions. And I think that this can lead potentially in the future to a normalization effort.
I want to welcome Spencer Brown back into the chat. Spencer, I've been fascinated by the change, not just in the way that the American diplomacy is playing out now. By the way, I think it could be because it's this particular president. I've frankly been amazed at the reception and the potential. It just seems to me to be a possible real shift here. And again, I don't want to overstate it. As Eugene and David have both pointed out, you don't want to make too much out of it. But I've been around long enough to know when I see something moving, and it certainly feels that way right now.
Yeah, definitely. I agree exactly pretty much with what EJ was saying about this change in the way that we are interacting in the region. If you look at in the past, we've basically come in and said, we're going to fight for your freedom, and then we're going to sort of implement this one version that we think is best for your country. And instead, what Trump is coming in and doing is basically handing them the keys to their own future and saying, listen, we're going to get rid of these sanctions. We're going to consider, investment, but it's up to you and the people and the government that's there in order to actually make it happen and make the country a better place. And I know, and I've seen some chatter already this morning that some of the president's detractors are saying, how dare he be negotiating with these people? How dare he be considering these kinds of things? This is going to lead to a new outburst of terror in the region, which obviously ignores the last 4 years is when we actually saw that under the previous administration. And if you want to see how President Trump handles terrorists and people trying to destabilize the region, consider what he did to the Islamic State, what he did to Soleimani. Clearly, Trump is giving them the opportunity to be full participants in the region, but obviously he's shown, and I think his sort of bragging on how high recruitment is for the United States military is to remind these leaders that if something were to go wrong, we still have the ability to make it right.
I want to get to David Carlucci in just a bit, but David, really quickly, I want to get Eugene's final thought here. Eugene, I'm up against the last break here, so in about 15 seconds, your overall thought of what we've seen so far here today.
Yeah, I think President Trump praised correctly his efforts to end the Yemeni attacks or the Houthi attacks on shipping. And at the same time, we need to keep in mind, if Iran had a nuclear weapon, the Houthis would have been untouchable. And that underscores that President Trump has, delivered an important win for global safety, but the bigger battle remains ahead, and that's Iran.
David, in the last 15 seconds or so we have, I understand skepticism. But I think on balance, an interesting couple of days thus far.
Yes, for sure. I think most importantly, the Trump administration has to deal with these issues with a scalpel and not a blunt force instrument like we've seen with tariffs or the J6 pardons, where he just does one foul swoop. I mean, this issue with Syria saying, hey, come for the oil, but stay for a fight with the Kurds is more like manipulation than diplomacy. And so that's why I think these moves can be very fruitful by the Trump administration, but they have to be done delicately and manipulate with a scalpel and not a chainsaw, because these are very fragile and they could have very undue consequences if done inappropriately, especially what's going on with Syria and how that funding and money could find its way into very problematic hands. So that's why these are very, very delicate negotiations that have to be continue and watch carefully.
Got to be really careful with that. EJ, I apologize. Thank you for joining us, as well as Eugene, David, and Spencer. I'm Kevin Corke. Fox News continues with our coverage after this.